Addressing tricky issues, tricky problems is a minefield. And if you don't do certain things before you start addressing those issues or problems, it's likely going to avalanche and snowball into something that is going to be harder to deal with. And that's why I want to share some things that you need to do before you address tricky situations or tricky issues with people so that you can increase the chance of getting a better outcome. Hi, I'm Tash, Pieterse, Certified People Leadership Coach, helping you to become a leader people actually want to follow. In this short, sharp episode, I'm going to talk through some key things that I always recommend my clients do before addressing tricky situations. Now, what do I mean by tricky situations? What are these situations that you need to be considering some of these things for before you try and address them? They can be things like talking about unmet expectations, dealing with poor performance with someone on your team, giving hard feedback when you need to give some constructive feedback to someone about something that they're doing that isn't working, or addressing a mistake, setting boundaries with people, whether this is in your personal life or your work life. These can be really uncomfortable conversations. Or raising an issue or a problem. So raising something that needs to change or be addressed. Now, there are a whole other range of different things that could amount to a tricky situation or a tricky issue, but those are just some of the more common ones that as a manager, you are likely experiencing right now and that you need to address with your team. And as always, everything that I talk about can be transferred and can be translated into your personal life, because how we're showing up in our personal life is how we're showing up at work, and how we're showing up at work is generally how we're showing up in our personal life. So we want to make sure that how we're showing up in all of these situations is matching who we really want to be, which is a lot of the fundamental work that I do. So you've got this tricky situation, you've got this tricky issue that you need to deal with, that you need to try and navigate with someone. What do you need to do before you start? What do you need to do before you jump into this conversation with them? Here are 4 things that I always recommend any manager or any leader starts with before they jump into the conversation. Number 1, take the time to process and manage your own emotions. One of the things that happens too often is we charge into these conversations, into these situations with all of our emotions still really at the surface. And those emotions then tend to come out in those conversations, especially when we start talking about what's going on, what we're thinking, what we're feeling. That person then has their own reaction, has their own version of the story. They maybe get defensive, and then that raises your own emotional state. That then gets you back up. Managing your own emotions and your own emotional state before going into these conversations is so important, especially if you have a lot of fear about these conversations in the first place. So if you are someone that is avoiding these conversations, that's likely to avoid these conversations because I'm scared that they're not going to like me, I'm scared that they're going to think I'm mean, I'm scared that they're going to hate me, I'm scared that they're going to be angry with me. If there's a lot of that fear that's coming up, that is based on a lot of emotions about this situation and about dealing with it. And so if you go into these interactions and into these conversations not having managed that emotional space, not having managed those fears, those worries, that's then going to bleed into this conversation with this person. So taking the time to understand, how am I actually feeling? What do I need to process to be able to get myself to a calm space? Because if you can get your mind and your body calm in relation to this issue, your ability to be open-minded and to be really clear-headed in this conversation is going to increase. It's really important to be in a space where you can keep your emotions in check. Now, I'm not saying to not have any emotions. The point is not to not share any emotions at all in these conversations. It's to make sure that you don't get overcome by your emotions, that it then impacts your ability to have a really good, useful, and constructive conversation with this person. So that is the first one. Take time to understand, process, and manage your own emotions. Some things that you can do, you can write out how you're thinking and feeling so that at least that can be processed at that level. You can go for a walk. You can just sleep on it. Take some time to just process what you're thinking and feeling before addressing the situation. So that is the first one. The second one is to get really clear on why you want to have this conversation, why you want to address this tricky situation. This might sound like a really obvious one, like I know why, because they're making mistakes, or they're not performing, or they're overstepping this boundary. So like you might know why. What I really want you to do, and what this is really talking to, is get really crystal clear about why this is an issue and the impact that it's having. Because sometimes we feel the need to have these conversations, but when we actually dig into it, it can sometimes be a trivial thing. It doesn't necessarily have a big enough impact, but this needs to be addressed. So getting really clear on the why. Why does this matter? Why is this important? What impact is this having? If I don't talk about this, what impact is that going to have? So get really clear on what that is, because that person might ask, like, why are you talking about this? Like, why does this matter? You need to have an answer for that. So being really clear about that up front is really important. So what you can do here is get to the really key crux of the issue and why it's important. So get really clear on what the impact is. The next thing to do before you have these tricky conversations is be specific about what the actual problem is and what you want to talk about. So this is about having specifics about what the actual problem is that you want to talk about. So you know why you want to talk about it, you know what the impact is, but what is the specific issue? What is the actual problem that needs to be talked about? This is really important, because when people don't know what the specifics are, when they don't know specifically why this is an issue, why this is important, they're not likely going to engage very well in that conversation, and they're more likely to get defensive. We all know that when we use categorical language like you always, or you never, or you didn't do this, or you didn't do that, or you did this and it had this impact, if you can't specifically say, when this happened, in this project, on this day, this impact happened. When we can be really specific about those things, people are more likely to engage in that conversation, and they're more likely to remember that particular instance that you're talking about. So this is so key, because if you are not specific enough about what the actual problem is, people are less likely to value this conversation with you. And you really want them to value it and engage with it so that you can get the best outcome possible. So make sure that you have specifics, make sure that you have examples, make sure that you're really clear about why this is relevant and why this matters. And then the fourth thing that I really encourage you to do before addressing tricky situations is open your own mind. Now, sounds super basic, but this is actually the hardest part of these 4 steps. This is to open your mind so that you can be genuinely open to what they have to say, to having your own mind change, to be able to consider different points of view. One of the most powerful lines that I ever heard was from Oscar Tromboli. He's a listening coach, and he talks about the true definition of deep listening is the willingness to have your mind changed. It doesn't mean that your mind has to change, but the more willing you are to have your mind change, the more likely you are that you're truly listening to that person. And this is really important when you are navigating tricky issues, when you're wanting to resolve really tricky situations and problems with people, is really being willing to have your mind changed. Again, it doesn't mean that your mind has to change, but that you're willing to have your mind change based on what they might say, based on what they might share from their side of the story. Because the truth is that no matter what you think, no matter what examples you have, facts you have, observations, feedback, anecdotes, stories, no matter what you think you have in your arsenal to go into this conversation, it's not 100% of the story. It's not everything that's true about the situation, because you are not them. You are not a mind reader. So you have absolutely no idea about what is going through their mind. You don't know why they did or didn't do something. You don't know why they do or don't agree with something until you open up that conversation, you share your side, and then you listen to their side. And the key part of this is opening your mind for that, being curious. If you are not willing to be open-minded, if you're not willing to consider that something else might be going on, willing to consider that you don't know everything, you're not ready to have this conversation. And I've done podcast episodes on this before around making difficult conversations simpler. Honestly, the key crux of it is if you are not willing to be challenged, to have your mind changed, to even be wrong, you are not ready to have this conversation, and you're not actually going to get the best outcome possible. Because what you think might needs to happen with this conversation might completely change based on what they have to say in response to what you have to say. And you need to be willing to consider that. And this is such a key part of being an amazing leader and being a leader that people trust and respect, is that you are willing to consider alternative perspectives. And this is really important in decision making as well. If you want to be a great decision maker, you need to be willing to consider alternative perspectives, because You are not the be all and end all. You are not the knower of everything. You are not the expert in everything. So you need to be willing to be wrong. You need to be willing to take in more information, to consider a different outcome, to consider a different alternative. But that means that you need to have an open mind. It means that you need to be curious. These are the 4 things that I deeply, deeply, strongly encourage you to do before you address any tricky situation, before you look at setting boundaries, before you look at talking about unmet expectations, before you look at handling poor performance, before you give really critical, harsh feedback. Get really clear on these 4 things. I'll share them again. Number 1, manage and process your own emotions. Get yourself into a really balanced, grounded emotional state. This is a really key part of high emotional intelligence. If you can learn to regulate your emotions, this is going to be really powerful for you in increasing your emotional intelligence. And this is one of the key things that we talk about in VIP Leaders, my leadership development program, because exceptional leaders that people trust have really high emotional intelligence. The second thing, get really clear on why you want to have this conversation. Why does it matter? What impact is it having? So that you can bring that to that conversation, so that you can make this relevant for this person. Number 3, be specific about what the actual problem is. Have specifics, have examples. Be really crystal clear about what the actual issue is that you are talking about with this person, so that they have a better chance of responding, so that you can increase the chance of having a really constructive and open and productive conversation. And then number 4, open your mind. Have an open mind and be curious to what might come out of this conversation. Remember that you don't know everything, and that you can't know everything because you're not a mind reader. And get yourself into a place where you could be willing to change your mind based on what they have to say. If you are adamant that what you think is right, that your way is the highway, this is not the time to be having this conversation. I would really encourage you to think about how you can open your mind, maybe talk to someone about what are some alternatives that you're not seeing, how can you bring some more curiosity into how you think, into how you deal with things, to allow you to have more open-mindedness. And I would say that this is a skill that I would encourage you to practice again and again every single day. Remind yourself, I don't know everything. It's important for me to ask more questions. It's important for me to find out more so that I can have a better chance of getting better outcomes. The more curious we can be, the more questions we can ask, the better outcomes we can create. And this is really important when we're dealing with tricky situations, is the more open-minded we can be, the more open we can be about what the reasons are that people do or don't or have or haven't done something, and the better outcomes that we can create and the stronger the relationship we can build with this person. So I'm going to leave this here, a short, sharp episode for you on what to do before you address tricky things, before you deal with really difficult situations. Do these 4 things and you will increase the chance of this conversation going extremely well 1,000 times. Doesn't mean that it's necessarily going to go well. I'm not going to put that guarantee. I can't guarantee that for you. What I can promise you is that if you take time to put into these 4 things before you deal with tricky situations, you are more likely to create a conversation and an environment where you will get a better outcome. As always, let me know what you think. I am always really interested in how these podcasts land for you. And if you ever have any topics that you want me to cover, any challenges that you're experiencing, let me know and I'd love to do an episode on it. And if you do have a moment, please leave a rating or a review on this podcast. It means the world to this podcast being discovered. And I hope that you go forth, lead with less worry, self-doubt, and overwhelm so that you can have more confidence, clarity to be a leader people actually want to follow. Have a great week, and I'll be in your ears next week. Hey, that's all from me today. Thank you so much for listening to Lead With Less. It means the world to me if you could take a moment to leave a rating and a review on Apple, or just rate with 5 stars on Spotify. It means a lot to the growth and the expansion of the podcast. And if you know any other people leaders who could do with a dose of inspiration to level up their leadership skills, then please forward on this podcast to them. I would really appreciate it. And as always, if you have any feedback or have any thoughts, please message me on LinkedIn, Instagram, or email. I'd love to hear from you.